This blurb on the back of the box seems very realistic. Should we really be giving away these secrets?
Hello everyone, I'm Kevin, otherwise known as Forum BX257, here to bring you another 1980s G.I. Joe tour review. And today I'll be taking a look at the G.I. Joe's stealth fighter, the 1988 Phantom X-19, and its pilot, Ghostrider. Now both Ghostrider and the Phantom make their first comic book appearance in the Old Nova comic run of G.I. Joe in issue number 76. The Phantom makes its first cartoon appearance in the 1989 5-part miniseries, the DiC animated Operation Dragonfire in Part 4. Unfortunately, Ghostrider does not make an appearance in cartoon form ever. Interestingly enough, the Phantom also makes an appearance in the 1990 NES G.I. Joe video game, but only as an animated segue and not as a playable vehicle. Again, Ghostrider does not appear there. At 14 inches wide, the Phantom isn't exactly the widest G.I. Joe aircraft in the vintage run, but it is the longest at 28 inches long. That means it's longer than the 23-inch long Sky Striker. It's longer than its near rival, the Cobra Condor, at 24 inches wide. And it's still longer than the next largest aircraft, the 26-inch long Night Raven. And just to compare it to some smaller aircraft, here it is with the 18-inch 1986 Conquest and the 17-inch 1984 Rattler. The Phantom X-19 has the following features: an opening canopy, the cockpit slides forward on these rails, and we have space enough for a pilot in the front seat, and a weapons operator in the back seat. And these are designated very clearly on the back of the box. The cockpit is actually fairly well detailed, and it even has little seat belts, the standard for the 1988 and 1989 vehicles at the time. A close-up of all that beautiful cockpit detail, as well as the railings on the side here. When pulling the cockpit forward to open it, it's fairly natural to use the nose cone to pull it forward like a tab. However, as you can see, it's actually fairly easy to pop the nose cone completely off. And I'm sure a lot of kids did this, resulting in this being the only part on the Phantom X-19 to be an easily lost part. Two top-mounted missiles, winglets on either side, which slide out and pop out the cannons. To the rear, we have manually flipping air brakes. You can see the engine detail underneath that. Underneath that, we have the primary payload of a wing-mounted glider bomb. The bomb is just held in by its wings to the clamp there. And to put the bomb in glide mode, you just swivel the wings around. It does have little locking points, so it doesn't like spin around like a helicopter. There's also no forward or backward on the wings themselves, so you could have them around like that if you want. Just depends on which detail you like facing forward, I suppose. You'll notice that the articulation point for the wings is a little circle there. And in order to put these back on, there is a point in the middle of the clamp, which is a tiny little nub there. So when you put it on, this thing actually kind of locks into place, like that. And at the very back, we have a pull tab, which releases the landing gear. I have to admit, it's a little bit hard to pull this landing gear tab backwards, and it's even harder to push it forwards. It doesn't help that the actual tab that you hold onto is really small. I can barely fit my fingertips onto it. But we get some really nice landing gear popping out, 4 wheels per landing gear, and they're actually rubber wheels which do turn very nicely. The gear struts themselves are highly detailed. And the front ones are actually on a little pivot here. You might need to give them a little help if they get stuck. When you pull down on the landing gear release tab, the engines on the other side also slide downwards. Unfortunately, the engine detail doesn't slide down along with it.
There was a variation in the landing gear mechanism late in the release and standard for non-North American releases. As I stated before, the common North America slide release requires a lot of force while holding a tiny tab. Hasbro solved this by making a lever-actuated release. By pulling downwards and toward the rear, a lot less mechanical and physical force is needed. You can even wrap 2 fingers around the little lever easily. The downside is that it's very visibly pointing downward in the back now. I guess you can pretend it's another air brake panel. I'd better address this sooner rather than later. The pilot's codename is the same as a certain Marvel Comics supernatural character. This was an accident on Hasbro's part, despite Larry Hama, writer of the file cards and Marvel Comics G.I. Joe series, warning them not to use it. To be fair to Hasbro, it is a cool name, and Marvel wasn't using it at the time. Hasbro might not have even been aware of the character since monsters and supernatural comics faded away in popularity with the disco era. It wouldn't be until 1990 that Marvel revitalized the character. As such, Larry Hama couldn't call this character by his correct codename within the G.I. Joe comic and turned it into a running joke. But this isn't the only comic book copyright infringement here, however. The aircraft is also named after a certain ghost who walks, Lee Falk's The Phantom. I guess even if Larry Hama knew about this, he still wouldn't care about getting in trouble with that DC Comics property, since he didn't work for that company. One very odd thing is, on the side of the canopy, we have the pilot's code name, instead of the rank and real name of the pilot. They've also gone and separated the words and even trademarked it, which is pretty ballsy of Hasbro to do that. On the file card, it's actually written as one word, which I kind of like better, to be honest, because the comic book is actually 2 words rather than 1 word. And back here, we have Ghostrider's call sign symbol, Gambling with Death. That's very different from what was before on other G.I. Joe aircraft. You notice this odd striping back here. And I believe that this is kind of like the black stripes which are around the pilot's canopy just to help deflect some of the sunlight which might come into the pilot's eyes. Well, in this case, it helps deflect some of the sunlight which might bounce off this crisp edge into the intakes. It's sort of a visibility thing as well, and probably wouldn't be there if the main hull of this aircraft wasn't gray. It really should have been black, like an all-black jet, but I think that might have given the impression that this was maybe a Cobra aircraft at first. So the lighter gray kind of gives it more of a good guy vibe, I suppose. The main rival to the Phantom X-19 and its pilot Ghostrider, at least established in the comic books, is the Condor Z-25 and its pilot, the Aero Vipers. As a matter of fact, in G.I. Joe Special Missions number 28, a Condor is shown blowing up several of the unused stealth fighters on the ground, earning its kill signs.
Now you're probably looking at the overall design of the Phantom X-19 and thinking that it looks more like it's at home in the Battlestar Galactica universe than it does in the real world, as most G.I. Joe aircraft up until this point were based on, or at least influenced by, real aircraft at the time, albeit the G.I. Joe versions were a little bit exaggerated. However, this has nothing of a contemporary aircraft feel. In fact, it doesn't even look like a stealth aircraft as we know the traits today. However, you do have to keep in mind that even though the most famous stealth fighter, the F-117 Nighthawk, was actually built in the early 80s, it wasn't until 1990 that it was revealed to the public. It was actually classified up until that point. So Hasbro designers actually had no military reference to how to build a stealth fighter, even though they had plenty of unofficial references for it. And that's where the design of the Phantom X-19 actually comes from.
You'll notice how flat the Phantom is. It's specifically designed that way to mimic what aircraft enthusiasts thought would be needed in a stealth fighter at the time. Here's a model kit released in the late 80s of an F-19, which is the name speculated to be the next US Air Force fighter designation, after the F-18 Hornet and before the F-22 Raptor. Other notable features include the teardrop-shaped body, like a space shuttle lifting body silhouette. Also of note are the large top-mounted intakes and rounded fins. The Phantom has no canard fins, but the tail fins are shown rounded on other theoretical depictions. This one, shown in a 1987 Popular Mechanics magazine, seems to be the highest influence for the Phantom design. As we know today, the Phantom and the enthusiasts got everything wrong. Here, the 2003 Skysweeper is G.I. Joe's representative of an F-117 Nighthawk. This craft has triangular height, very angular with wings, it has conventional intake placement, and even the name doesn't follow what came before. The Phantom's X-19 designation being an experimental F-19, in the same vein that the XP-14F Skystriker and X-30 Conquest. Interestingly, the Phantom is supposed to have a top speed of Mach 3.5, like a spy craft, while the real-world F-117 was a subsonic craft with no afterburner. The Phantom X-19's pilot, Ghostrider, comes with only one accessory, his rather distinctive red fabric scarf. And that's what he looks like without the scarf. While he does have a very practical look to him, his overall gray and black is maybe a bit bland, so it's nice that we have a little pop of color with the scarf. Interestingly enough, generally aviation scarves are white silk, not red like this. However, the red fabric that this is made out of is actually the same fabric that we get from 1988 Destro version 2's cape. So I suppose if you've lost a scarf, or if you've mangled it somehow, I suppose you can cut out a spare Destro scarf. But I have to say that the scarf is actually longer than the length of Destro's cape here. Anyway, looking at Ghostrider a little bit closely, I really like the fact that they've tried to make him an all-one gray jumpsuit. Unfortunately, I think over time the gray that they painted on the front here has actually darkened a little bit, so it no longer matches the gray of the pants. This was supposed to be all one thing here, and not separated into a shirt and pants here. Overall, the gray and black is fairly subdued, but he also has this very sci-fi silver helmet. Not quite sure it goes that well, but it's okay. I kind of wish they would just continue the gray onto the helmet. He also has little pops of green as well. I do have to admit, though, I'm not quite sure about this detail here. This sort of corded thing. I mean, I would think that this would be an oxygen mask, but it looks more like a CB radio instead. I'm not sure why he would be carrying that. He also has some fairly odd details that I'm not quite sure about. Like the fact that he has a molded on, stitched leather holster and a revolver in here, which is it's a very cowboy-like thing, as well as what I think is an eagle head belt buckle here, which I guess is more of an aviation thing, but I'm not quite sure what the Western theme here is going for. He also has like spur-like things on his boots. Again, that's not a very aviation-like thing, but more of a Western cowboy thing. According to the file card, he's born in Chicago, Illinois, which I don't really associate with the Southern cowboy culture, so I'm not really sure where that comes from. One very interesting and very funny detail, however, is the map on his leg. Now, I don't know if you can see that very clearly. I'll zoom in as much as I possibly can. But that is a map of the state of Ohio in the United States. Now, you're probably thinking that I must be wrong, that just can't be, but it is. And one of the in-jokes that the Hasbro designers made was that was supposed to be zooming in on Cincinnati, Ohio, which was then the rival toy maker Kenner Toys headquarters at the time. That's a real nice little declaration of war there. A war which actually Hasbro did win. Comparing Ghostrider to other prominent pilots, we have Ace here in his very spaceman-like outfit. And we have Slipstream here in his far more practical jet fighter-like outfit. As a matter of fact, that's one thing that Ghostrider seems to be missing are these leggings which keep the blood circulation in pilots. As the Phantom is supposed to be a vehicle capable of going Mach 3.5, you would think that he would have more of these fighter pilot accoutrements, but he kind of doesn't. He looks more like a bomber pilot. And now to compare Ghostrider with his counterparts on the Cobra side, like the Aero Viper, pilot of the Cobra Condor, which Ghostrider almost tangles with. But we also have Wild Weasel here, pilot of the Rattler. And while he didn't tangle with Wild Weasel personally, the Cobra pilots actually wore generic Wild Weasel outfits. I'm pretty sure that Ghostrider actually fought and brought down a couple of those generic Rattlers. You'll also notice that Wild Weasel also has the scarf and map on his leg, just like he does. So I guess there's kind of an old school vibe going on here. It's funny how the line about Ghostrider willing himself to be invisible sounds cool here, but this is basically the same thing that the 1986 Xandar file card has, and yet it sounded more sinister there. Some European releases of the Phantom didn't come with Ghostrider, but with the 1983 Ace and his helmet. I'm not entirely sure which countries got this version. The UK definitely didn't though. The name on the box and file card still state Ghostrider, oddly enough.
As someone who really likes the jets in the G.I. Joe line, I'm really glad to get this in my collection finally. It's big, it's beautiful, and I love the history behind the design. However, a lot of G.I. Joe collectors are very frustrated with this toy, and after living with it for so long, I can totally understand where they're coming from. Check out the sliding canopy, for instance. It comes out on these rails, and as you can see, it actually doesn't clear the pilot seat. It only clears the rear seat. So it's actually very hard to get a figure into there, especially when the figure is actually obstructed by the seat belt. Which, of course, if you want to pull it on and off, it's really hard because you can't really get your fingers in there. On top of that, the railing system is attached on the inside of the canopy, which again, if this thing pops off, it's really hard to reattach. Then there's the notorious wing-mounted cannons. these things constantly need repair. Mine are okay, but these things often just flop right back in after you've popped this thing out, and the winglets themselves are on a 3-rail system, which all 3 have to be sort of aligned properly in order for this whole mechanism to work in the first place. Now, I have a very easy fix for that, but it's still something that's complicated and it really didn't need to be. And then there's the landing gear themselves. Tab is so hard to pull down on. Half the time they're kind of stuck midway like this. I have to make sure that I'm pulling this thing all the way in. And even then, the wheels sometimes get stuck on the panel. As a result, I don't recommend leaving this thing sitting on its landing gear. I believe the weight of this vehicle can actually warp the landing gear struts so that they won't even fold in properly because they just don't have enough room to actually go in fully. Phantom X-19 and pilot A lot of G.I. Joe collectors are very frustrated with this toy, and I can totally understand that.
And with the canopy in its locked back position, it's actually a little bit hard to see Sneak Peek's face, but that's alright because he's not the star of the show. Ghostrider is. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind the scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.